Good morning. Hi, thanks for coming. This is a session how we can 3D printing, how can you make it a third industrial revolution. We have a panel discussion later on. First, there will be an introduction by Dr. Petra Troxler, who is a research professor at the University of Applied Sciences in Rotterdam. We'll talk a bit more about what these people do later. Dr. Marlene Vogel is also with us on the panel. My name is Philipp Stephan. We'll start with Peter's introduction to the topic, then the panel discussion, and later we'll have a Q&A for your questions.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. Right. Good morning, everybody. So that's me. I'm a research professor in Rotterdam, actually on the topic of the third industrial revolution. And what I want to do briefly right now is give you some sort of background when I talk about industrial revolution, what I mean by industrial revolution. If we look at Google, and I did it a few months ago, Googling for industrial revolution, I found over 12 million results, 1.5 million blogs, 17 million videos, and a bit over 500 discussions. So certainly there is something going on regarding this industrial revolution, and I was hoping to have you fly in a few books, which is not happening right now. So, there we go. That's sort of the reading list that I was consulting when preparing my investigation into the third industrial revolution. You see the list dates back, this list dates back to 2005 with Neil Gershenfeld, professor at MIT, talking about the coming revolution on your desktop, the topic of fabbing, fabrication laboratories. Actually, if we look at what psychologists, ethnographers, sociologists looked at in the 1980s, 90s, we could already see some of the topics that I'll be addressing in this short talk coming up. My main reference is Jeremy Rifkin, 2011, talking about the third industrial revolution. I go into a bit more detail later on. Some of you might have read or heard of Chris Anderson's Makers. Again, he's talking about a new industrial revolution. He's coming from a different perspective than Jeremy. Jeremy is an economist, so he's looking at the economic issues happening in society right now. Chris Anderson, as you know, was with Make magazine, is now doing more robotic stuff. He really thinks that the maker movement is the industrial revolution, and I'm going to briefly explain to you why not. Lastly on the list, Peter Marsh. Peter Marsh works for the Financial Times in the UK, and in his theory, we actually had, or we're part of a fifth industrial revolution. Now, what I don't have on slide here is, we're here in Germany. The German industry strongly believes that they are in their fourth revolution. But let me explain why I think, together with Jeremy Rifkin, that we actually are in the third industrial revolution. His main theory is that the great pivotal economic changes in world history have occurred when new energy regimes converge with new communication regimes. So what does that mean? Let's look at the first industrial revolution according to Jeremy Rifkin. He's saying, in the 19th century, we had two major changes in technology. One change was in the media industry, in information, was the invention of the automatic printing press, which immediately made it extremely cheap and easy to distribute newspapers. And in the energy sector, there was steam-powered technology. Those things roughly happened at the same time, so that led to that first industrial revolution. The second industrial revolution, according to Rifkin, in the 20th century, was the proliferation of electric communication, particularly telephone and radio, and the oil-powered combustion engine in terms of energy systems. And the third industrial revolution, now in the 21st century, When we look at communication, that's a no-brainer. That's the internet, invented some 40 years ago, which is a major change to communication and information infrastructures. Without the internet, we wouldn't be here. And in terms of energy, it's the shift from traditional energy sources to renewable energy sources. Now, there is one fundamental difference between the first two industrial revolutions and the third industrial revolution. And Jeremy Rifkin phrases it like that. The conventional top-down organization of society that characterized much of the economic, social, and political life of the fossil fuel-based industrial revolution is giving way to distributed and collaborative relationships in the emerging green industrial era. We're in the midst of a profound shift in the very way society is structured, away from hierarchical power and toward lateral power. And I let Jeremy, from a conference that happened roughly a year ago in Brussels, explain in his own words what he means by that.
This is power to the people. This is the democratization of the economy.
We're having a sound problem here.
This has huge implications.
Trying to start again.
This is power to the people. This is the democratization of the economy. This has huge implications for small and medium-sized enterprises, as the Vice President has said over and over, and producer cooperatives, and large companies as well. The first and second industrial revolution scaled vertically because the energies were elite, they were expensive. Centralized communication, expensive. You had to have a lot of financial capital to put the infrastructure and move it. That meant we needed to scale vertically with centralized factories, centralized supply chains, centralized logistics. And it favored national markets and national governments to regulate the first and second industrial revolution. The third industrial revolution doesn't scale vertically. That's why it's a new chapter for the SMEs and the producer co-ops and the consumers. It scales laterally.
So that's Jeremy Rifkin. You can look it up on the EU's website. Up, there we go. So again, first and second industrial revolution, centralized hierarchical structures, particularly with the energy regimes, but also with the communication regimes. Third industrial revolution, lateral, networked. And we see that with the icon machines that describe those three revolutions. Apparently, the icon machine of the first industrial revolution was the steam engine. The icon engine of the second industrial revolution is the automatic conveyor belt. And obviously, the icon machine of the third industrial revolution, and that then links what we're discussing today to the title of the session. The icon machine of the third industrial revolution is the 3D printer. I have a couple of more analogies to help understand what this shift from hierarchical to lateral power means. Look at the icon roles. The icon role in the first industrial revolution apparently was the capitalist. The icon role of the second industrial revolution is, in my opinion, the management consultant. The whole story of scientific management is a typical thing that was driven by the second industrial revolution. The icon role of the third industrial revolution is the prosumer maker. And again, it's not the prosumer makers that are driving the industrial revolution, as it's not the 3D printers that are driving the industrial revolution. It's changes in the economy and in society that are driving the revolutions. But these are the icons that help us to understand the changes that we encounter in the third industrial revolution. So again, the icon machine, steam engine, conveyor belt, 3D printer, capitalist, management consultant, maker. The structure used to be hierarchical in the first and second industrial revolution. It becomes lateral in the third one. Interesting to look at the supply chain. Supply chains in the first industrial revolution were mainly colonial, like the Brits going to the Indies, the Dutch going to the Indies, etc. In the second industrial revolution, supply chains started to become global. And you know, everything we buy comes from China, that type of thing. The growth of intercontinental logistics. Whereas in the third industrial revolution, with lateral structure, probably this global arrangement of logistics is not feasible anymore. And also looking at sustainability issues, global supply chains could become problematic. Looking at global conflicts, global supply chains could become problematic. So I expect that in the third industrial revolution, supply chains will move back to continental, regional schemes. And we already see that happening. Transport is another interesting topic where I end up with a couple of question marks for the third industrial revolutions. Apparently, in the 19th century, the railway system was the big highway for logistics and transportation. In the second industrial revolutions, the automobile and air travel became prominent. We don't know yet what will be the solution to transport in the third industrial revolution. Some people believe it's electromobility. I don't believe that. So I'm not on the same hymn sheet, singing from the same hymn sheet as, say, the German government. They strongly believe that electromobility will be the mode of transport in the third industrial revolution. I don't think so. Another development where we don't actually know where we're going is when we look at cities. 19th century, we had those industrial inner cities, crowded, dark, smoky. In the 20th century, second industrial revolution, the big move into suburbia, the big dream of suburbia, which the latest in 2008 started to collapse. We don't know yet what's going to happen to cities in the third industrial revolution. We do know that sooner or later, half of the global population will live in cities. But what does that do to cities? We don't know yet. Similarly, social structures. The 19th century was dominated by this issue of the working class. The 20th century, the middle class emerged and became a rather stable thing throughout the 20th century. Again, that has come to a striking end if we look at income distributions globally and in developed countries. We don't know what will be the iconic class of the third industrial revolution. Maybe it's the creative class. I don't know. And looking at consumption to finish off that list, we had like low-scale neighborhood consumers in the 19th century, in the first industrial revolution. The invention of mass consumption is a thing of the second industrial revolution. And in the third one, we're certainly moving towards what people call the prosumer, the working client, these kind of things. Whether that's good or bad is a different thing. But certainly, and that sort of to finish off and to link back to the discussion we're going to have, is that the icon technology, 3D printing, that I've been talking about at the very beginning, has now reached the consumer market, and prosumers are starting to be able to make and print their own stuff. And I think that's where we want to take off with the discussions. Thank you.
Hello again. Thanks, Peter. If you're late, this is a session 3D printing. Have a seat, I guess. How can we make it a third industrial revolution? Yeah, I guess I'll introduce everyone again shortly. You've seen Professor Peter Troxler. He's a research professor in Amsterdam, and he, as you have seen, is researching this so-called third industrial revolution. Dr. Marlene Vogel, sitting next to me, is co-founder of Trinkle, a Berlin startup. Maybe you'll say a few sentences about that.
Yeah, hello everybody. We offer a printing service for everyone. So what Peter just said in his talk, now we are changing the consumers more to prosumers. So everyone can take part in creating things. And this is our vision, and this is what we want to provide to people. So my startup is called Trinkle, and we want to offer to you all 3D printing so that you don't have to own your own printer. You can use our printing service, or you can find interesting stuff on our marketplace. And what is even more important for me is that you can get into contact, that you can discuss about designs and about products. Because this is very important, in my opinion, that we don't just consume what there is from some large companies, but we all can participate into creating the stuff we really want.
So maybe we can start with this idea of the maker or the prosumer, so the new kind of person. Who is the prosumer or the maker in this context? Because on your platform, for example, you have two kinds of people. You have designers selling their stuff, and you have people buying it. So what's the role of these people in this new idea of
Yeah, in the classic role, of course, it's that the designer, the creator of a product, puts a lot of effort into thinking what the product should be and what the consumers might want. And maybe he tries to find out what the consumers want by doing some market research and so on. But this is quite indirect. They couldn't communicate until now about really tangible products. And now the role of the consumer on our platform is more that you can interact with the designers, just ask them something like, could you change the design of this and that a little bit? Could you put my name on this? Or I need this for a special purpose. So we want to kind of build a bridge between designer and consumer so that they can really communicate.
That's it. So maybe a step back. So this big headline of the talk is 3D printing. So as we just heard, it's just a part of this revolution. It's not like the machines will start this revolution. It's rather part of a paradigm shift. So what exactly, I mean, I talked about this last year. I showed some consumer 3D printing machines, but we're talking about a lot of different applications actually. Can one of you sort of like maybe sort out? We have now these 2,000 euro machines that everybody is supposed to buy in a way. I don't know if they will do that. We have very large industrial machines. How will this sort of like influence this whole shift?
Well, I mean, 3D printing has been with us for quite a while, some 20, 25 years. So it's not that, this would be this kind of groundbreaking technology that just has been invented or parachuted in from outer space. Industrial applications for 3D printing, because of the cost of machines, the cost of printing time, the cost of materials, has so far been pretty limited to prototyping, to the production of artistic objects, to very specific applications, particularly in the medical sector. And why in the medical sector? Everybody amongst us is different. And if you think of implants, you actually have to fit the implant to the individual person. So you're all the time in a production system where you only want to produce one thing. So it doesn't really matter, or you don't really get the economies of scale of producing hundreds of thousands of spoons. Okay, spoons are all the same shape and size, but implants, every implant is different. So this traditional manufacturing has always been preoccupied about economies of scale and producing many things of the same. That's also the relation to mass consumerism. So 3D printing is best suited to produce batches of one or batches of a few, maybe 10, maybe 50, maybe 100, but certainly not thousands and 10,000s and 100,000s. So the shift to the prosumer, the shift to more empowerment of the end client, the shift that the end client gets more to say about the product that she or he wants, is exactly that prosumer shift where it's required to have individualized products. So you're coming back to that issue of batches of one, and suddenly 3D printing becomes interesting. I mean, of course, there's a lot of questions to be solved about materials and making materials cheaper, etc., more sustainable, and so on, and so on. But that's basically the match between the shift to the prosumerism and the 3D printing technology.
Yeah, that's completely true. And what many people don't know when they read about 3D printing and that everyone can now have a 3D printer and produce great stuff, that it's until now only half true, because the printers you can buy for yourself, they are really cool. They are really fun to use. I have one myself. But if you want something that is quite a little bit like what you can buy in a store, then at least until now, you still have to use the professional industry printers, and this is something which I think is quite important, that consumers get access to this technique to really get prosumers in this way. Because if we can just make toys for ourselves, it is even more limited to what extent we can use this 3D printing.
So the idea, I mean, MakerBot and stuff like this is on magazines, so everybody assumes these machines will enter our homes, but I guess what you're saying is these machines are rather tools for learning how this new technology works, and then something else will probably happen in a different place. I mean, your company basically prints on professional machines and then ships it to people. So yesterday in a talk at Dorkbot, a design student presented her product, and she said, we only had access to this toy printer, the MakerBot. So she had to go to a different service. So this was a very serious thing, because at the moment, I think in media, you always get presented the MakerBot because it looks so nice and it's shiny and they put colored lights on it. And inside, they tell you, well, you can do your parts for your body with it. But there's some kind of something missing in between. So the idea I get is that these machines maybe are only something on the way that will come after this. So the MakerBot is not the future, but rather a tool for getting there, maybe.
Yeah, I think it depends on how these home printers will evolve, of course. Until now, there's a large gap between these home-used printers and the professional ones. But of course, the gap is getting smaller and smaller because the home printers get better. And of course, at the same time, they get more expensive. And the professional printers, they have some printers that are not so expensive yet. They get to, I don't know, maybe 8,000 euros, and the really new good MakerBot is something about 2,500 euros. So the gap is closing, but until now it's true. If you want to have something which is really comparable to what you are used to get from a product, you should get to a professional printer.
You know, you could compare it to remember those days when mobile phones first had cameras built in, and the shaky videos we were able to make with those cameras. And we've come a long way to HD video making on mobile phones. And it's a bit the same with 3D printers at the moment. What we get at home is really those shaky 15 frame per second low-res type of things. And over time, technology will definitely evolve, and materials will evolve, and I guess a few years down the line, I'm not going to say 5 or 10 or 15, but that's probably the range. We're going to see different machines that can print in different resolutions. There's another thing attached to that. Those shaky 15 frame per second videos were kind of the basis of some different style of aesthetics. So that this kind of low-res shakiness became almost a kind of expression. So that could be a different development, you know. In design, we're now kind of used to think that design has to be shiny and elegant and slick and all these kind of attributes that we think of when we hear design. But again, also this might change, that design can also be edgy can be raw, can be low res, and still be designed. So that's another interesting development.
So in 20 years, we will sort of like see these early experiments as some kind of retro 8-bit stuff, like remember when it was all blocky, and I guess it's going to be cool again at some point.
I think that's a very important point about the role of the designers, because just yesterday we had a class with some product designing students, and they are now starting to get into this rapid manufacturing process. They start to learn about what are the constraints, what are the new things we can do with this. And they learn lots about material and surfaces, and they are quite interested in the different things they can do with this. In the past, they were mostly trained for injection molding, and this was, of course, absolutely reasonable, because this is what the products were manufactured at the end. But today, they start to think, okay, what products can we really create, which are completely suitable for 3D printing and are kind of adopted to 3D printing. So I think there are some very interesting new products coming up when the designers start to really think about what can they do with these 3D printers.
So, I mean, the idea of a revolution is always that different people sort of like are in power afterwards, and we have this idea of the prosumer, but I fear, I mean, people are, the majority of them are sort of like lazy. So who are these new actors really? I mean, they are probably designers able to sell their stuff. We will have different ways of producing stuff and getting it to the people. But in the end, I think the mass will sort of like buy something like they've done before, only it's produced in a different way. Or where do the people come in? I mean, the idea, I mean, this whole bunch of open source printers, they come from this idea that everybody becomes a maker. And I fear this will always be something that excludes people as well, because having the access to these design tools and learning how to do something is always some kind of elitist thing. Like, you have to know how to learn these, to work these tools. How does this relate? Where are the people in this?
Yeah, I think this is quite an important point, because we all hear lots about we can all do our own stuff now. But the question is, do we have the skills, or do we have the time, or do we want to do this? So for me, a very important question is, if I have a cool idea for a product, how do I get this idea into my machine? How do I convince the machine to produce my idea? And so, okay, if you have the skills, it's cool. You can just design your own stuff. But if you don't, I think people should have a chance to make their ideas come true, their product ideas, without having all these skills. And this is why we offer people a service if they have a cool idea, but they lack the skills. They can just contact designers on our page. They can just put this on a blackboard and say, okay, I have this and that idea, and then designers can maybe communicate with them and can help them do this. And I think this is quite important, because you're absolutely right. Some people have the skills, some people have the interest in doing this, and others don't. But the other people maybe still want to have interesting products. So I think this is quite important to get these two together somehow. And until now, of course, these home printers are really for people who are completely into this, who really like to experiment and like to really put this effort in, but not everyone wants.
Well, I would like to add a couple of points, or even 3 or 4 points. One, the point about, it's kind of, people are not able to do it. I expect that this will change quite rapidly over the next 3, 5, 7 years, because this technology is now quite quickly moving into education. And once every kindergarten or every primary school pupil has had exposure to these kind of technologies, it's not anymore this, oh, I don't know how to do it. It becomes quite normal. Like to use video, it becomes normal to use 3D printers and digital manufacturing technology. So that's one development that starts to happen right now. Places that do have 3D printers get inundated by requests from schools to come and visit and use this kind of technology. Second, yes, of course, at the moment, these tools are, the rich guys, and I mean guys, toys, very much so, very much so. Neil Gershenfeld in his TED Talk says this digital manufacturing in the developed world is personal expression through technology. There's nothing wrong with that. But if we look at the rest of the world, and comes 2030, the developed world will be 10%, and the undeveloped world will be 90% in terms of population. Access to digital manufacturing technology for the developing world really means empowerment and really means making useful stuff they wouldn't have access to before. Last point, maybe this question, will not the majority of people remain consumers and just buy stuff? Quite possibly, but it really depends what the forces behind 3D printing, digital manufacturing will like us to do. There's one striking, I mean, the big thing is consuming and not making. That's a result of the second industrial revolution. There is one particular area where this has not happened, where we think that do-it-yourself is the normal thing to do, and that's in transport. Having a car, driving a car, going everywhere in your own car is the normal thing you do. And if you're so stubborn to always try to use public transport, you must be sort of not quite from this world. So there is one area where industry convinced us that do-it-yourself is the right thing to do. So imagine a digital manufacturing industry wanting to convince us that do-it-yourself is the right thing to do. I'm convinced that they would be perfectly able to convince us to do that. I don't see yet who that will be in kind of the range of players we've got. But if somebody would want us to do that, they would be perfectly able to do that, and it would happen.
So instead of, I mean, a lot of people have been saying the 3D printer is sort of like the new personal computer, so maybe it's a new car in a way.
If it is the new car, then everybody will want to have one.
Okay, so maybe this is the flying car after all. So I have a few questions written down here, which I will come from the auditorium, but we'll maybe answer them already. I don't know. I want to talk. I don't really want to talk about the weapon, but we will talk about the weapon. But first, maybe like this copyright question. I mean, that's something people always are interested in. There's a category on the Pirate Bay for some time now. It's called Visibles. It's basically a category to put in digital representation of real objects. So it means like it's sort of like an ironic warning shot. You will be next. So what's the development of this? I mean, you have original designs on your platform, so there will be some people who will sort of like lift stuff of designers. But how will this sort of like influence industries who are into traditional production? So when will the Rolex come out of the printer, or will this become reality at a point where it doesn't matter anymore because all these people on all these companies already use the new manufacturing methods? So what will come first?
I think that's a quite interesting point, because in the past we did not think too much about physical design. Yeah, we bought some coffee machine or something like this. We did not go to a store and bought a physical representation of a 3D object. We just buy a coffee machine. So, but now we really start to think about what is what is design worth, and I think we start to realize that it's really a very important thing. In the past, I just bought something and I was not too concerned about the design. I wanted to look good. But now then, when the design goes digital and we can really send the design over to a different continent, we really start to think about what should we do about this. And I think this is a very important process to think about this, that we can maybe avoid some mistakes or some problems we had with other things like music or some e-books or something like this. So I think of course, it is something which will be much discussion about, and of course I don't have the solution for this problem, but I think it's an important step that we are aware that there can be a problem and that we should think about how we cope with this.
How much time do we have?
So it's now...
Because you sort of, with that IP question, you sort of hit a hobby horse of mine. So I could go and ramble on and ramble on and ramble on over IP and open source and open design and what's good and what's bad and
we
why
can leave
and
the
why.
question now and maybe focus if people have questions to specifically tailored to this.
I would just want to make, say, one or two statements on it and promise not to go on for the next 2 hours. One issue with IP protection, be it tech inventions, be it design, is that IP protection is a choice by the designer to either use it or not. This is different to copyright. You cannot avoid copyright. If you want to share your composition, your drawing, your videos, your photos, you have to become active and say, yes, I want to share. If you make an invention, if you create a design, this is not protected by default. You have to go and file a patent or register your design, which, particularly in the case of patents, is a lot of effort and takes a lot of time and takes a lot of money. So when a designer, inventor, sits there with his new invention or her new invention, there is IP protection, filing a patent as one option. There are other options, like keeping it secret or throwing it out to the public. And an inventor has to evaluate which of those options actually best fit their business models. Some of them think patenting is good, and patenting is particularly good if you know there are like 3 or 5 people out there who could make it, and you can observe them, and once you see them making your stuff, you can go and sue them. It's a completely different ballgame if there are billions out there who could make your thing. You're not able to monitor billions. So that might influence your choice of IP protection or not. The other thing is, IP protection is a big gamble. You're putting money and time on something and expect that later on you will recover that money. This is a big gamble. You never know whether it's going to work or not. So investing your time and money in marketing your product and actually getting the revenue might be the much smarter decision. And the last point, even if something is patented, there is no law, at least in Europe, there is no law stopping me from reproducing it for myself. Even if something is under copyright, there's no law stopping me to producing it for myself, as long as I'm not producing it commercially for other people.
Okay. So if you're interested in that topic, find Peter after the talk, and he'll talk to you. I guess we have to talk about the weapon, because that's something the media always picks up. There's this guy, Cody Wilson, from Texas, and he started building weapons with 3D printers. And I think yesterday it was announced that a machine or a weapon called the Liberator is now a completely 3D printed weapon that actually works. Before, he only had sort of like the part. So basically in the US, you can buy a lot of parts for your gun for free, but you have this one registered piece, the low receiver, and they printed this. And this has spawned a lot of question about gun control, about creativity, and if basically 3D printers are now a bad thing because you can do bad things with them, meaning producing weapons. So what's the deal with that? I mean, we have to talk about it. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, maybe I'd give my options first. So, my opinions first. I think, of course, with every new technology, you can do things which are not desired by the public. And I think, especially in Germany, it's a quite, we are all, maybe not all, but most people think that it's not a good idea to print weapons. And my personal opinion is that I really don't like this at all. But of course, with every new technology, you can do these things. And of course, I can take my car and run over somebody. And I would not say, oh, a car is a bad technology for that reason. Maybe there are some reasons, but I think there are always these things, and we cannot avoid these completely. I can only speak for myself. If we see something like this on our platform, we will remove it because we don't want to have this. But of course, one has to keep in mind that Cody Wilson really has a license to produce weapons in the US. So maybe it is questionable if it was a good idea to give him this license, but of course this is something the US government has to choose.
So in the end, maybe it's not so much of a difference what you produce a weapon with.
Yeah, of course, there were some things. It goes back like 20 years when people started to build their own weapons by welding together some metal parts, and these weapons were of low quality as well. And I know with this weapon, this Liberator he made, you can just fire one shot, and you are most likely to get hit yourself because the weapon can explode. Of course, he will improve this, but I think there's a good reason that if you really do weapons properly, you really have to put much effort in them. And if I can go to the next market and buy an axe and kill somebody, yeah, and people would not say that tooling is bad because of this.
Yeah, I think there are two issues to be, or probably three issues to be discussed. One is actually how does legislation with regards to weapons, how does that work, and how is that best set up? And certainly on the continent we do have quite a different approach to gun regulation than the approach in the US. So that's one level of discussion, which has nothing to do with 3D printing at all. The other interesting discussion is this guy, Cody, and why he's doing that. And I was kind of inclining to give him the benefit of doubt until I read the discussions he was having on Twitter this morning, which convinced me that no, he doesn't deserve the benefit of doubt. He wants to produce weapons because he thinks producing weapons is good and is part of free speech. So that relates then back to gun regulation and how do we regulate guns? And of course, I mean, what you said, we have to talk about regulating guns. We have to talk about how do we figure out the bad guys. How do we create a society where bad guys don't need to be bad guys? That's the discussions we need to have. We don't have to have the discussions if 3D printers are bad, or planes are bad, see 9/11, or steam cookers are bad, see Boston. That's a discussion that we don't have to have, because that's a useless discussion. But we need to have the discussion, how do we create a society where people don't feel that they need to buy steam cookers and blow them up, or buy 3D printers and print guns to shoot at people. That's a discussion that we should have.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, we could open the discussion. I mean, maybe not this discussion, but hopefully. So if you guys have questions, I don't know how this works. Somebody probably has a microphone.
There's a microphone sort of halfway back. So if you queue up to that microphone, because the whole thing is recorded and later streamed and put online. So that's how tech works here.
Yeah, so please queue at the microphone in the middle. Or hand it around. Be creative. Moritz.
Thank you. My name is Moritz Avenarius. I came from Hamburg, where I co-founded a fab lab with some other guys, the fabulous St. Pauli. But I have another different topic. I wanted to question the talk, Peter, that you gave in its linearity. I don't see, as you presented it, especially with this numbering, first revolution, second revolution, third revolution, I think it's much more that more and more things are together in one place at one time. It's like the communication media. We still talk with each other. People write letters. We read books. They don't disappear. And I also see that in the industry, things are more next to each other. That's why I like the term next society, what's coming up much better, that Peter Drucker once came up with. And I'd also see that the Moore law that people always mentioned for the microprocessing, it's also very linear, And I don't think that that happens with 3D printing. It's much different, it's much more networked, it's much more complicated, and I would like to see a different kind of talking about it, a different kind of narration about what is happening right now, but it's much more confusing. Things are next to each other, and it's definitely not that linear that you presented it.
I was not intending to present it as A, a linear development, and B, as like separate phases that are over and not done anymore, and then comes next phase, and that comes to an end, and all what we had in the second phase. Yeah, of course. I mean, this is kind of a skeleton to help us think about it. Equally, the term revolution is most inappropriate. Nobody is running around and, you know, throwing out the big car manufacturers' assembly lines and stuff like that. So the term revolution is most inappropriate. And of course, you're absolutely right. This networked paradigm lends itself much more to a blurring of many different things happening next to each other. If we just since I talked about it, if we take the example of IP protection is not going to disappear just because of open source. But we do have various options next to each other. And the same is with mass production. The same is with, you know, if we look at classes. Working class has not disappeared. The middle class has not disappeared. But it was kind of the dominant class around which many things evolved in the past centuries, respectively. So, yeah, we need different ways to talk about, and the word industrial revolution has been used by so many people. That makes it easy to connect to those discussions, even if they use the wrong word. Many people use the 3D printer and think of, since you're coming from a fab lab, of laser cutters and CNC milling machines and the whole thing, but they call it 3D printing, which better probably would be called digital manufacturing, whereas 3D printing should, according to the specialists, be called additive manufacturing. All these kind of, you know, issues, how do we name something? We can have long discussions. But I think it's more important to sort of name the issues, even if the name is slightly wrong, but then have meaningful discussions. What does that mean to us? And our confusion now, and the many question marks I have, are part of that confusion, and that's the interesting bit about it.
I think it's even more, the revolution is more about semantics and how...
He just said he thinks it's more about semantics. Sorry, I have to repeat this for the stream. Yeah, but I think it's a good start to, as you did, talk about the question of what a society this will be, and not as much as how a single piece of technology will sort of like influence everything, but how this all works together. So next question, please.
Thank you. Stefan Grosselbeck from the Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society in Berlin. I am a little confused after this discussion, to be honest, and maybe I'm just missing something. I don't completely understand how big this is really going to be. You're comparing 3D printing to the Industrial Revolution, to the invention of the car. These are major, major secular changes which affect everybody's life across the globe. But I haven't heard about a single sort of killer application coming from 3D printing which is going to fundamentally change my life. So help me understand that. If I look at my household, if I look at the products which I use, which are made of plastic, which are non-complex, which are non-electronic, so at least as of today, potentially, you know, ready to be produced through 3D printing. Yes, there are spoons, but it's actually quite limited. So help me understand, why is this so big? Why is this so fundamentally going to change everybody's lives in this room?
I think the revolutionize thing about this third industrial revolution, or the fifth, depending on who we rely to, is our thinking of products. Maybe it's not so much about what you will have in your drawer or in your home just tomorrow. It's more about how do we think about production. Do we think it as static, or do we think about production as being dynamic, and think about that we can change these products? And of course, you're right, there are many things which are compound somehow. You have your mobile phone, where you have maybe a plastic case and some metal parts, and of course you have all these microcontroller electronics inside of it. And of course you will not just press the button and the new phone will plop out of the 3D printer. But what you can think about is that you can produce parts which can be assembled later by a 3D printer, and these parts can be completely individual to your needs. So if you have a special lampshade which you want to have in a very special way that it fits into your room, or if you are somebody who builds some things, if you are a maker, yeah, and you want to build some quadcopter and maybe assemble some camera holding so that you can fix your camera onto this, you don't have to go to the store and search for it and look for it and you don't find it. You can just say, okay, I want to have this, and it is 3D printed. So of course it's not like Peter said, something like the old stuff will not be there anymore and the new stuff is there from today. It will be a change, and it will be a constant change, and the production will be more decentralized. And I think it's not so much we can point to this and say, okay, everything is different. It's a process.
And please don't get me wrong, this industrial revolution, the third one, as for easy wording, I call it now, this is not about 3D printing. This is about a shift from hierarchical centralized structure to lateral network structures. And I'm using the 3D printer as the icon, as I used the steam engine as the icon for the first one, and the assembly line as an icon for the second industrial revolution. It's kind of, if I would have to think of one piece of machinery that represents the notion of what's going on, then it's the steam engine, or it's the assembly line, or it's the 3D printer. I'm not saying this development that we're seeing now equals 3D printing. That would be wrong. This development that we're seeing now equals going from hierarchical to lateral, going from centralized to networked.
Next question, please. Hello.
Hi, my name is Daniel. And my question goes together with the last question, I think. Because what is the killer application? In my eyes, the killer application from 3D printing is the 3D printing itself. So my question is, what can you say about the fact that I heard that there are already 3D printers that can produce 3D printers? I think this is a very interesting thing, and regarding to the discussion if you can do bad things with this, and to solve this and not to get it in false hands, you have to discuss the problem itself. I don't think we have the time if there is a machine that can produce machines.
Yeah, I mean, the RepRap, which is an early open source printer, had this idea. So, but the machine doesn't assemble itself as of yet. It's basically a machine that you buy the parts and then you print some parts. Of course, the idea of this was a little ironic as well. I think we're a bit far from this, from having the technology of printers actually reproducing. I mean, there's always this fear of gray goo, you know, the machines reproduce themselves and will sort of like cover the world. But how far are we from this? I don't know. Who wants?
Yeah, I think machines never do things by themselves. We always have to tell them what to do. So I think with this gray goo, I think there's no danger at all, because we would have to program them to reproduce themselves without any reasonable reason for this. So I think this is not the main problem. And when you say, okay, we have to think about proliferation, because when everyone has a 3D printer and we cannot so easily control what people do with this. This is true, but in the end, it's the same with a normal 2D printer. I can print some I don't know, some bad stuff when I write kill this and that person and throw these the flyers all around, and I can really do some really bad stuff with paper printing as well. And of course, I would not say that we have to look how we control what people are printing with a 2D printer. So, and still we have to discuss about it, of course.
So don't worry, Skynet probably is a bit away already, or yet.
Well, I mean, certainly research is going on about technologies that actually can sort of reproduce themselves. The most dangerous machine that is able to reproduce itself is the human being at this moment.
So it always comes back to the people, I guess. Yeah. We're almost out of time. It's like 3 minutes to the hour. Maybe you want to use a minute to plug your company. Why not?
Okay, well, I think I said quite a lot about the company, so I just want to say, if you're interested in collaborating on 3D designs, and if you are interested in 3D printing and want to be part of the community, visit us on www.trinkle.com. It's TRN, it's Trinkle with an CK and an LE, so for Germans it's not so easy, but I hope you can find us, and we will be happy if we see you on our website.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks to you two. Thanks for being here and joining the next session. Thanks.
Thank you.